research is questioning and disagreeing. I'm Mayla Boguslav and I study research. I ask questions such as, what is research? How do we measure its success? I live by the motto, ignorance is bliss, because when you don't know something, it's an opportunity to learn. Researchers live in the ignorance or the unknowns. They ask questions, identify areas of ignorance, lead the way to gain knowledge, and most importantly, ask the next questions about our new ignorances. Welcome to the Ignorance Podcast, where we learn about research through research questions. Let's welcome our guest researcher for today. Please introduce yourself by name only and your favorite thing to do outside of work.
My name is Bradley Shavit Artson, and my favorite thing to do outside of work is throw a ball with my dog.
Dogs are great. I love pets. I also all the time will take breaks from work and pet my dog or go for a walk. How does it help you kind of get out of working mode?
Well, what's great is she doesn't care what I'm working on, and she's very focused on the relationship. So this is a dog who actually fetches and brings things back, and I love that.
Yeah. My dog does not fetch and bring things back. She just grabs it and then wants to play with it. So what questions excite you in your work? What questions are you currently pursuing?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about ways that religion can be a tool for people to thrive and also can be a dead end for creating unnecessary rigidity. And how do you go about trying to explore the staying power of religion? It is one of humanity's oldest engagements. People don't walk away from it, don't leave it alone. It's really interesting. Even people who claim to not be religious will often claim to be spiritual. So you watch it get smuggled back in. And is there a way to encourage constructive religion, which for me is religion that helps people thrive rather than religion that gets used as a cudgel to beat people down?
Yeah, can you say more about your first statement, this idea of thriving versus rigidity?
Sure. So I think in its ideal, what religion is about is the insight that we're not isolated, we're all connected to a larger reality. And that if we connect to that larger reality with mindful awareness, with deliberate intention, that it can give us access to greater strength, greater energy, greater capacity to renew and face the challenges that inevitably come with being alive. I think that's the promise of religion. But what ends up happening along the way is that religions also create barriers. And they create ways in which insiders can park their fears at the expense of their own humanity, and certainly at the expense of outsiders. So we come up with things we do that we think appease our divine image that are ways of keeping others out and are ways of trying to ensure that bad things don't come our way. And that kind of religiosity is toxic. It's toxic socially. It's also toxic internally. Because, of course, no matter how strictly you observe a ritual, you are going to face life's bumps no matter what. So is there a way to root our religiosity, our spirituality, in a drive to have a broad-minded approach to the world, to approach the world with curiosity and delight and wonder and a sense of gratitude? And so much of my work is about that. How do we unlock the capacity of religion to allow us to experience joy and connection?
It's a really lovely question. I'm currently reading a book by Kristin Neff on self-compassion, and it reminds me very similarly that one principle of self-compassion is recognizing that we're not alone in the world, that the human condition includes suffering, and when we can remember that we exist in the world and not alone, and that there are others around us, kind of what you were saying around religion as well, that can help us not feel as alone and not feel as frustrated in the suffering itself. Yeah.
If you expect religion to be protection against suffering, in the end you'll be abandoned. Like, religion won't work, and you'll be left with nothing. But if religion can be what gives you the compass to make it through the suffering, to still find meaning and connection, then it can actually be a source of help and a source of strength.
Yeah, and the other one you said that is also a step of self-compassion is mindfulness, being aware of what's going on, and you can use religion as some of that awareness to help us through those moments and stay mindful. You mentioned gratefulness, right? Being grateful to everything around us, and I think that's also a piece of mindfulness and recognizing that there's other people out there too.
Right, and look, I think the opposite of mindfulness is often not paying attention. It's often allowing yourself to live in the fears of a future, as if doing that will mean the future never comes. But what ends up happening in those moments is then you lose the present that you actually already have, right? Without in any way changing what's coming down the road. So to be able to remind yourself to enjoy what is joyous today, despite the risk and the uncertainty of what's heading at you, that feels like just a wise approach to life to me.
Yeah, so I guess this gets at my next question of how do you hope to impact the world?
Well, I think most of us don't really impact the world. The world is huge. And I think if we can manage in our little pocket of the world to do no harm and to maybe do some good, that may be as good as it gets. But I know for me that the impact I feel is my ability for my teaching to create strong and resilient people who go out and then have other people who they help with their example in their life. And then my teaching is not only what I teach in person, but I write. And the miracle of writing is that you can impact someone's life who never actually meets you. And so the ability to kind of package up your insights and put it out there for others means you never know where it goes or who uses it, who grows from it.
Yeah, a lot of people on my podcast so far have mentioned their teaching and students as a big piece of what they hope to impact the world with and that they have impacted. I agree with you that the world is pretty big. I love asking this question because I think we don't always think about it, the impact piece, especially in science and research, that we state impact, but we don't always ever get back to that impact sometimes too. And so it's important to really talk about it and be honest about it. And I appreciate your honesty saying that we can't really necessarily impact the whole world. Can you speak more about, in relation to the question you're asking that you stated earlier, how do you hope to impact the world in that way? If you gain more answers into that or can help people do that, how will that impact the world?
Well, I think there are multiple levels. One is bad religion does a lot of harm in the world. So to the extent that mediocre people hook themselves onto bad religion, and then they become really vicious, really denigrating of others, if we can lessen that, that's a good all by itself. But I think it's also true that good religion, religion that is linked to the cause of thriving and connection, can give people greater resources of growth and of resilience. And so in that regard, I'm hoping that the research that I do will give people tools, not that they didn't know existed, but it'll remind them of stuff that they had allowed themselves to not focus on or they had forgotten. And that it will help people to be more connected, more relational, more resilient than they would have been otherwise.
Yeah, so in general, this idea of really influencing others through our writing, through our questions, through our teaching. A question I also love to ask, because I think it's quite important, is who has influenced you? Where do you fall in this line? Who are the people you look up to?
Well, On one level, I would say that part about being a rabbi, which I am, is I have a long lineage of teachers, some of whom I learned from personally, and some of whom their teachings are contained in holy books. So going all the way back to Moses, I have a lineup of great human beings who have devoted their energy to putting those teachings into the world. And then I also have a lineage of less well-known people, my wife, my parents, my grandparents, the people I run into who may offer a throwaway comment that I end up taking with me for the next several decades. High school teachers, grade school teachers. We're all of us part of a living web of shared influence. And they have all been my teachers in that regard too.
Yeah, I love talking about who has influenced people, because there's so many people before us, so many people after us, and even little things, as you said, comment in passing, or a grade school teacher that said something to you can really have a big impact on us that we don't always realize. And we do that also for others, right? Teaching being
That's
a big
right.
one, as you said. Mm-hmm.
That's right. And we're not even aware of it because they're not aware of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, you say something and 5 years later that pops up in their head and becomes really important because of things that have happened in their life, but you're never aware of that.
Yeah, so I will say that I have actually reached out to some of my teachers who have been really influential for me. I've reached out to them much later, or they've reached out to me even to check in, and it's been really lovely to reconnect in those ways. And so I always encourage people to do that if they can, because I think it's always really nice when we can let those people know how much they've impacted us. I think it kind of gives you a nice smile, both sides.
And it makes what they've done with their lives that much more beautiful.
Yeah, and we can really actually showcase all of these impacts, right? It doesn't have to be unknown in that way.
Right.
Yeah. So how do you know if you've been successful at your work and as a researcher? What is your evaluation criteria?
Well, on one level, the most trivial is, did I complete an assigned task? So I've been working on a book this year called Wells of Wisdom. And the argument of the book is that Judaism offers not just a theology, but a technology for human thriving. And I now have a completed first draft.
Oh, that's exciting.
So that's a measure of success. I've got the manuscript sitting there. We just finished another year of school, and we had an ordination, and there are 6 new rabbis in the world because of the work that I and others have done. That's certainly a measure of success. Some of the graduating seniors gave me a gumball machine filled with M&Ms with my face on it. That's an unusual measure of success, too. Right? So there are all kinds of ways to see that the work you're doing matters to other people and that it helps them with the business of living. That I always find so astonishing and so gratifying.
It's great. The M&Ms, how is it eating your own face on an M&M?
Well, it has been great for my diet because I find I cannot put them in my mouth. So they're sitting in the little dispenser, and my guess is they'll be sitting there a long time.
There you go. Save them up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that leads perfectly to my next question of what has been your most surprising result? So you were surprised as a success measure to get that gumball machine, potentially.
Yes.
So if you can say kind of a little bit more broader, what has been a big surprise in kind of your research and work at large?
Well, I'll tell you a nice example. I often speak at congregations around North America, and I was a scholar in residence at a synagogue of someone who had been a student of mine 10 years earlier. And he did something really unusual in the Saturday morning service. I don't even remember what it was. I'd never seen it before. It was lovely. And when one of the people asked him where he learned it, he pointed to me and said, he taught it to me. And that's a lie. I would never have thought of it in a million years. But what he meant by that was I gave him the tools to be able to come up with that. And that was pretty shocking and wonderful. Like people taking it in places I would never take it, and then giving me the credit for it. And that happens not infrequently.
And that's nice that you got to be there too, to see it. That he physically got to point at you in that way.
It was really beautiful.
Yeah, that's amazing. And in general, I hope that what we're imparting to people are tools, that they can then take them and run in many different directions. I think that to me is part of the beauty of research, is that you don't actually know where you're going to go until you really get there. And even once you get there, the new questions you can really ask are numerous. And again, you don't really know what those are going to be. And I love that curiosity piece of that, for sure.
Yes, it's a beautiful thing. And that's part of the open-endedness of the research, which leads to more research. It opens up new questions.
Yeah, I guess speaking of that, can you say more about the book you mentioned around this Wells of Wisdom and thinking about Judaism as a technology?
So, I think often Judaism gets put in the category of Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, in the category of religion. But interestingly enough, in the Hebrew Bible, there's no word for religion. Like, it's a culturally specific concept. And it doesn't exist in biblical civilization, because you have to assume that if there's a category called religion, then there's a category of not religion. And the Bible doesn't know that division. So in the ancient world, there was no word for Judaism. There was just Judahite culture, Israelite culture. And what we call religion was a big part of it. But it wasn't a separate thing. So the life of the children of Israel was Judaism. I think we live in an age in which people are returning to that sense of how to organize their spiritual life. So what the book does is look at areas of human wisdom and say, what resources does Jewish wisdom bring to this conversation? What does it have to add to this discussion? What tools, what insights, what ways of thinking about it? What stories does it tell? How does it help shape a conversation on these important aspects of being human? And it turns out Judaism has a lot to say on what does it mean to be human. We've been making people for thousands of years. And we've been making really resilient people who can put up with a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of hatred, a lot of poverty, and pogroms, because of the wisdom they find in their own traditions. And I think the world is hungry for that. So I try in the book to offer that wisdom to human beings.
Yeah, I think people find it surprising that there was a not religion. Like that there wasn't a word for religion because there was no not religion, as you said, in the biblical times. I remember learning that history and kind of being floored by that, like not knowing that that was even a reality, because it's just so not what our realities exist in. And then at the same time, reminding myself that I grew up at Jewish community centers, right? And on some level, it's not exactly the same, but it's meant to be a space that's really the cultural center, the community center of the religion that I am a part of. And sometimes I did religious things there, sometimes I didn't. But in general, this idea that really the religion is where all this community stuff lies, still I think does exist. And as you're saying, is coming back into favor. And so, yeah, I just find it really fascinating how religion works at large, and this idea that Judaism can really shed light, as all religions can shed different lights on how to live our lives in these ways.
Well, and also then to say that, In the Roman context, it makes sense to call something a religio. Like it's a Latin term. So Christianity from its birth was a religio. But Judaism wasn't. And so it makes sense that if you ask American Jews, do you believe in God, you'll get a larger number of them saying no than if you ask a bunch of self-defined Christians. But if you ask those same Jews, does Judaism matter to you, they say yes. And that's a puzzle by Western criteria. It's just not for Jews, though. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I agree. One form of Judaism that people find is really that community aspect, that what draws them to it is the community. And so they don't feel that they have to take on any of the other things, including believing in God or other things like that, too.
Correct. And look, a lot of it is also, I would add two more categories to that, heritage and destiny. We share a heritage. And whatever your own personal metaphysics are, you're still going to sit down and have a Seder for Passover. And that's because it's who you are. It's identity. And we have a destiny, right? And that also links us as a people above and beyond any ideology.
Yeah, so again, this past, present, and future, to some extent, all connected, which is really nice. What is your favorite disagreement? So we talked about surprises. We just talked about your book a little bit. And I think in all of this, many people could even disagree with what we've said up until this point. So what is your favorite disagreement?
Well, in general, my favorite disagreement is a disagreement in which the people who disagree each learn something. So it's disagreeing not for the sake of winning, but for the sake of a deeper understanding. One of the ones that I like to use, because it bothers just about everybody, is to ask people if the sun goes around the earth or the earth goes around the sun. People have been executed for giving the wrong answer to that question. But it turns out it's a nonsense question. Like, it depends on what your constant is, and that's subjective. So it's just as correct to say one stands still and the other circles. It doesn't matter which one it is, you're making an assignment. And I love that because that disagreement lifts us out of thinking we're having a literal conversation. We're manipulating symbols and we're manipulating metaphors for the sake of better understanding phenomena. But neither are literally true.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of my favorite philosophical questions. How do you know the sun's going to rise tomorrow?
Right.
And I'll say today, actually, like, I know the sun has rose, but it's cloudy. And so I can't see the sun. So what does that mean? So I very much agree with what you said, that the best disagreements are when both people learn. I really love that. Part of this whole idea of this podcast is I want people to be talking about what we don't know, right? And talking about what we may not even know ever, right, in these ways. Maybe some of these questions are completely unknown unknowns. And to me, I think in the pursuit of thinking about them, whatever answer you choose to follow, right, I think that pursuit of thinking about it and trying to come to some conclusion is really fascinating, whether you even get to the conclusion.
Yeah, so Mayla, look, one of the big arguments people beat each other over the head with these days is there a multiverse or not? Mm-hmm. Right? And I love that argument because by definition we'll never know.
Yeah.
Like, you can't step outside of this time-space bubble to get to another one to compare and contrast it. So what you're doing is you're thinking about logical possibilities. Mm-hmm. And then you're trying to decide which you think is more probable. And even the most hard-headed scientists will have strong opinions on are there multiverses or not. And there's benefit to be had from those conversations. Right? It stretches us to think about what is unknowable, what will never get refuted definitively. Even though we'll never know.
Right. So I also find this interesting because part of me in my head is like, well, we can't know yet, potentially. That I always want to leave open the possibility that we could know, mainly because I think there are things that are really difficult, right, in this way to know. And to overcome that, we usually need some innovation in some way. And we don't know when innovations are going to exist. So another fun debate I love that I would be curious your thoughts on is artificial general intelligence. That a lot of the AI scholars, especially AGI with this artificial general intelligence, to really do it, right, to act on it, do research on it, create in different ways, you have to have a philosophy, right, or a theory of how it's going to work and what it actually means to create an artificial general intelligence. But part of this I always think about is, how do we know we've been successful at it, right? So that's why I love that question, because my theory is we start with questions, especially in research, and then if we can come up with an evaluation, right, how do we know we've been successful at answering that? I think the rest will fall into place.
All right, but I want to push you a little.
Sure.
You're giving an example of something that we don't yet know how to know. But there's nothing theoretical that will stop us from improving that. But we will never know what happened before Planck time. Like the laws of physics just crash. And that's not going to change. It's not going to be we'll come up with a better tool, or like the laws of physics crashed. And so there isn't any knowing beforehand. We can know more after than we currently know, but we will never, never, never know what happened during and before Planck time. And we will never, never, never be able to get out of our own laws of physics to find an alternative universe with a different set of laws. And people, particularly if I may say, scientists, are really bothered by that, because they want to pretend that there's nothing beyond the limits of science.
Right. Yeah.
Which
totally.
is just philosophically silly, right? Of course, science is a great, great human tool for knowing anything knowable. But it has limits. And there are areas that are simply never knowable. They're not about getting better measurements or expanded technique or better equipment. They're just beyond knowing. And so for me, the question is, are those questions worth asking? Is there benefit to researching that, knowing that at some point you have to throw up your hands?
What would be your answer to that question?
I think it's absolutely. Look, philosophy, in many ways, is the field in which you don't know how to do research. Because once you know how to do research, it becomes something else.
Yes, it becomes a field. Yes, that's why all of the original scientists, right, are also philosophers.
And it's why people get PhDs, right? So, astronomy used to be philosophy, and psychology used to be philosophy, and then once you figured out how to do research, it became something else.
Yes, yes.
There will always be work for philosophers.
It's really interesting. I guess I fell into your trap as a scientist in some way, wanting to say we can do stuff. So I guess in that vein, so science is trying to help us know things, and there's good pursuits in many different ways. Do you want to speak what religion can help us do on your side?
So I think religion, like philosophy, can help scientists be aware of their own limitations. So we're very good at helping with humility when we ourselves have it. That's not something to take for granted or assume. And then the other thing is science forgets that it's a human tool. And it thinks it's just a objective mapping of objective reality, but it's not. And so reminding people of wonder and awe and gratitude, what's its meaning, what's its significance, those are religion questions. Those are questions scientists ask as human beings, but they don't come out of their science side, they come out of their human side. And I think religion can be very good at reminding people to just stop and take a breath and be in awe.
Yeah, the humility really strikes me. I literally was just reading a paper about Toward an Understanding of Collective Intellectual Humility. It's by Elizabeth J. Krumrei-Mancuso et al. And this idea of intellectual humility is really fascinating with AI or other stuff like that, when we're really using intelligence as our word to think about automating some of these things. And this idea that religion, or even maybe just our humanity itself, right, that feeds on religion or philosophy or other things, can really help us stay humble to our own limitations. And that's a lot of what it talks about, really knowing our own limitations, and ideally in a collective way, knowing our collective limitations too. And it's actually easier to hold other people accountable to those limitations than it is ourselves. And so it makes the argument that we should really be focusing on collective intellectual humility, because it actually is easier to do even than just individual. Yeah, do you have any comments or thoughts on that?
Well, I've never really thought about collective humility, but I think our species is in the process of failing that. We're a very short-sighted species. We will always choose short-term benefit over long-term self-interest. And we're paying a very high price for that. So I'm glad there are people researching it.
Yeah. And I guess, like, what would be your take on religion or Judaism and how it comes to the humbleness? Like, kind of feeds into it as well.
So I want to be really clear. Religion is just as guilty of the human sins as other human fields. Plenty of arrogant clergy and theologians who think they can speak authoritatively on God's behalf. But at its best, religion tells you you're not God. And that job has already been taken. And so your job is to be a very good creature. And remembering our creaturely limitations is part of our job assignment. So I think when religion works, it's reminding us of that.
I guess then I'll push back and say, at least in Judaism, we say we're made in the image of God. And so the question is, what does the image of God mean in that way? But I've also read in different situations a book, Poor Technology, about how AI, artificial intelligence, is kind of like humans making it in the image of themselves. And is that okay or not from a religious perspective?
Look, I have a fairly idiosyncratic take on all of that. I was talking to someone this morning who wanted to make a distinction between natural and unnatural. Plastic is unnatural, shopping malls are unnatural. I have on my phone a picture of Earth taken from Jupiter. It's this awesome picture.
That's very cool.
You can see the curve of Jupiter, you can see the ring of Saturn, and then a little tiny dot that is the whole Earth. And I said, in this picture, can you show me the difference between natural and unnatural? And of course they can't. And I said, well, let me ask you a different question. When a beaver makes a dam, is the dam natural or unnatural? It's natural. So why, when people make a strip mall, isn't that natural? Like, natural doesn't mean good, it just means there's nothing else. So I think this is kind of like that question of where does that intelligence come from? It's not like we reached out of the system and pulled in something different. We're always, always, always in the system. And there is mindfulness that I think is baked into the system, of which there are multiple manifestations. And people are one of them.
Interesting. Some of this reminds me also of a classic question in mathematics of, is it discovered or created?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which is one of those great questions, by the way, for your listeners who are not scientists. If you ever find yourself with a mathematician and you need to fill 20 minutes, you ask them that question. Because there isn't a mathematician alive who doesn't have an opinion on the subject. You just have to hope that at the end of that answer, you'll say, I have to go now. Okay? That has saved many walks with mathematicians.
Yes. Yeah.
But it's astonishing in either direction that something that the primate brain created, this system of logical connections, can describe the motion of planets that those same primates were completely unaware of. Like, it's just mind-blowing.
So I guess it's interesting, like, a lot of people think about science as seeking out answers, right? And I guess part of what I'm doing with this podcast is say, yes, we want to find the answers, but also we really want to ask the questions. As researchers, we actually really focus on the questions, and that's really why I keep you in the question space at large. And I think it's actually a misnomer sometimes to say it's about answers. Now, we find answers when we want answers so we can help people in whatever way and have that impact. And we hope that happens ideally, and hopefully we pass that information on. But from a researcher's perspective, what excites me about finding an answer, and potentially an answer in quotes, is that I now can ask new questions and continue that curiosity and continue that line. How would you say that in a religious way? Because I think what's interesting is religion stays much more in the questions than science.
Here's my favorite example of that. The Talmud is this multi-shelf collection of ancient Israelite literature. Law, legend, agriculture, myth, poetry, science, everything gets sucked into the Talmud. And it fills shelves of books. In the Talmud as a whole, there are 5,000 disputes and only 50 resolutions.
Yeah.
And you can assume that's because the Talmud was badly edited. But if you've ever read the Talmud, you know that is not true. They don't let anything slip. So it's obvious that the editors of the Talmud were much more interested in generating good questions because answers shut down conversations.
Yes.
Questions open up new conversations. So the questions are always more interesting than the answers. And the use of answers is they become the springboard for new questions.
Yes, exactly. And this is something I love about Judaism. I think my own Judaism has really sparked what I do, to be honest, at large, that it is a religion that it's okay to question. Oh. And I've had many a conversation with many different types of Jews in different ways, asking really hard-hitting questions. And generally I've been entertained, and especially as you're saying with the literature, I did an entire learning session with summer camp kids on this, right? Really, like, where are all the questions in Judaism? And it's much more than people realize at large, and it's really the backbone of a lot of the rabbinical literature, which is pretty amazing.
It is completely amazing, and I think the genius of the rabbis to understand that it's in conversation that we approach a truth we can never reach. But the approach is still valuable.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I love both reading Judaism. I'm Jewish myself, and so I do a lot of stuff in the Jewish world, reading Jewish texts and other things like that. And it 100% influences a lot of my science too. They very much crosstalk between each other in beautiful ways.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Final question. If you could do anything, not limited by grants or other factors in your space, what would you be doing? What is your vision for the world?
Those are two totally separate questions for me. I am doing what I would be doing. You know, I consider myself one of those really blessed people. I am technically paid for what I do. But I'm doing what I would do if I inherited a fortune. Like, I love training rabbis. And I love studying Judaism. So I would do the same thing if I could afford it. I want to hasten to put out there, in case any of my employers are listening, I do actually need the salary, so it's just theoretical. But what I want for the world, I'd like a world in which people are safe to ask questions. That means their bodies have to be fed and housed and secure. And it means they have to be safe enough to receive an education. And they have to be taught that no question will get you in trouble, that you can follow it out however you want. I would love a world in which we were all, in that sense, Talmud students. We could all ask unanswerable questions and explore them together.
That's really beautiful. It's amazing that you're doing exactly what you want, and I agree. Everyone should be paid and to live and succeed in whatever way they need to, separate from the job. So I agree. Your employer should still pay you. And this vision of safety, and that's exactly the motivation of this podcast in so many ways, that really trying to bring the focus back to questions, back to curiosity, really keeping it open, that people can ask different things, and in general, really showcasing that researchers are really thinking in the questions, not just in the answers. And answers are really closing, are really static, as we've said, whereas questions are really inviting and open and exciting, whether they're answerable or not, in so many different ways, as we've been talking about.
Great.
And so, finally, I'll let you introduce yourself. Please say your name, your job title, and your field.
Wonderful. My name is Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson, and I am the Abner and Rosalind Goldstein Dean of the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies at American Jewish University in Los Angeles.
My biggest takeaway from Rabbi Artson is that we are all connected to a larger reality, and connecting to that mindfully and intentionally can give us access to greater strength and energy to face life's challenges. Almost everything Rabbi Artson says connects to other people, the world around us, and more. So how do you connect to the people and the world around us? Can we give gratitude to all of that and revel in the beauty of humanity and the world? This podcast is hosted by me, Mayla Boguslav, and produced and edited by Joshua Mendel. To learn more about this episode's guest and any cited or named people, take a look at the episode description. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Ignorance Podcast. Please follow the Ignorance Podcast wherever you get your podcasts to learn about science through research questions.